you're not up here? Come over and sit by me then. Maria. So you're here for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. She was white.
All right, it is 5:30, and I will call to order the Planning Commission hearing for Wednesday, July 10th, 2018. We have just a few items on the agenda this evening. The items that are starred on the listing are legislative. They require a municipal council decision. The Planning Commission makes recommendations for approval, disapproval, or continuance on those. The items that are not starred are administrative. The Planning Commission does make a decision to approve, continue, or disapprove those items. And we'll start this evening with a prayer by Mr. Howard and the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Smith.
Please join me in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be here as a community and as a commission, and we ask Thee to please bless that we will be guided in our thoughts and that we might have positive discourse and make good decisions. We're grateful to serve and live in this great city of Provo. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, before we start reading in the items this evening, I'd like to ask the commissioners to state their name and whether they have a conflict of interest with any items on the agenda this evening. And we'll start with Ms. Wyndham.
Maria Winded, no conflicts.
Brian Smith, no conflict.
Andrew Howard, no conflicts.
Deborah Jensen, no conflict.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflict.
Edward Jones, no conflicts.
Damon Rowan, no conflict.
Thank you. Right, our first item 1, is administrative. Utah Valley Hospital requests minor project plan approval for a pedestrian bridge over 500 West at approximately 1100 North in the healthcare facilities zone. And this affects the North Park neighborhood. And Dustin Wright will be presenting this item tonight.
All right, thank you. So here's an image of the area where this proposed pedestrian bridge would be located. This is showing the street right here is 500 West in between the Utah Valley Hospital and the Revere Health medical facility on the west side of the street. The proposed bridge would connect across for both of those. Currently, the pedestrian crossings along this corridor would be a signal crossing at Bulldog and 940 North down below. Both of those, down here. Both of those are signalized crossings. However, this crossing would be more of a mid point between those two to help the situation I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, where there's a lot of people that are just running across the street there to get across. And so it's a big safety issue that's been going on there, and this proposal is to help mitigate that. The hospital is proposing to construct, maintain, secure the bridge, and the way that it would function would be on the west side of 500, there'd be stairs and an elevator located just behind the sidewalk that would be able to get people up to the bridge so they could cross, and then it would cross over into the hospital. So here's a view of that, looking kind of northeast from the Revere Health parking lot over to the Utah Valley Hospital property. The structure here is where the elevator and stairs would be located. And then it would go over and enter into the second floor of the west building at the hospital. Once you're inside there's a stairway that would take you down to the main floor where you'd be able to exit. And this doesn't really show it very well, but on the side over here is where you'd see a door. There'd be some signage here that we'd like to be able to help people understand that that's where they'd be able to access this pedestrian bridge. Here's a view of the bridge from the north side, or from looking south, southwest, yep. And so the hospital has gotten approval from UDOT, since 500 West is a UDOT road, to be able to go over there right of way, and also Revere Health has given their approval for them to locate the elevator and stairs on their property. The bridge would be open during the hospital's normal business hours and would be closed from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And then reopened. So the bridge will have designed into it elements that will capture the rain and things like that, so those aren't falling on. That was a requirement from UDOT, falling onto the right-of-way below. It meets their height clearance, and it will be heated. Not the bridge. The bridge will be open, but the stairwell and the elevator would be heated and cooled. There'd be security cameras throughout. And so that's essentially what's being proposed here. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Smith?
I do have one. I'm imagining the hospital selected the location. I'm just curious. It seems like most of the people that I almost run over are a little bit further north of where this is being placed.
Yeah, so the hospital was they proposed the location and everything, and so I feel like it's something that the applicant is here, and they could probably address that, the reasoning behind that for you when that comes time for that, if you want to have them answer that question.
Yes.
What is the height, and how does the height, I'm talking about clearance, vertical clearance, and how does that compare to, say, a freeway overpass or freeway bridge?
Yeah, so UDOT's standard, well, the clearance is 17.5 feet. I'm not familiar with what UDOT's requirement is, but they did review that and approve that clearance there. And the hospital also approached UTA as far as if UTA had future plans for any type of light rail or BRT on this corridor, if that height would be sufficient for them, and they didn't have an issue with that as well. So,
Good, thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
One. Did you say that it's only open between 9 and 5?
correct. It would close at 9 p.m.
Oh.
and then open at 5 a.m.
Oh, okay. And so it's not a public bridge, it's a private piece of property?
Yeah, so the hospital would maintain and provide security and snow removal, anything like that. And so because that's the case, they would close it during those hours when the rest of their hospital is not open, since the access to the stairs and elevator on the east side of the bridge would be in the actual hospital. But it would be open to the public to use when it is open.
Okay, thanks.
And that was one of the questions that staff had, as well as when it went to a neighborhood meeting about the public access to it. And let me go back to the aerial kind of. So as I mentioned earlier, at Bulldog and also at 940 North, there's pedestrian signal crossings there. And so if you look at kind of the surrounding neighborhood that's around it, you know, there's the neighborhood down below 940 that would be able to cross if they were heading heading east, they'd be able to cross at 940. If pedestrians were coming from the north, they'd be able to cross at Bulldog if they knew that they needed to get across. Basically how it's happening right now, there's not a crossing mid-block. It's just people running across at their own risk. And so this is an added crossing that would help, even though it would be ideal to have it be open 24 hours. We understand that since it's not going to be a city-maintained facility, that we understand that limitation there with the hours of it being open.
I have one question. To your knowledge, has the hospital and Revere Health worked with UDOT and the city in order to make a pedestrian crossing at grade? This seems like a large expense to build an elevated bridge with elevators and stairs on either end. States drill, this is Highway 89, correct? Which is a state highway. However, other cities that the state highway passes through has gone to the effort, such as Springville and Spanish Fork's in the process of introducing medians that provide pedestrian refuge halfway across the landscape medians, also slowing traffic. Do you know if any of those efforts have been made on the part of the hospital?
Yeah, so a while back when this idea was being brought to the city by the hospital, I think those were discussions that I think were had at that time. I don't know the official position of UDOT on that, but I would be pretty sure that they wouldn't want any at-grade crossing because of the amount of frequency that happens. It would be constant. If there was some type of signaled crossing there, it would definitely slow traffic there. So I would think that everyone involved would prefer this over that option, in that it doesn't interfere with the vehicular traffic, which would help keep that moving along. And so I think like you said, it is a bigger cost, but it's something that the hospital was willing to do. And so that was something we were
Thank you.
happy to see. Yep.
Any other questions for staff and the commissioners? If not, I'd like to invite the applicant, Josh Rahatinsky. Hopefully I pronounced that okay. Please come forward and just state your name and present your item.
Josh Rotinsky, as you attempted to say, which most people make good at that. Really just wanted to reiterate the comments that Dustin had made, and to respond to, I think, the question that Mr. Howard had about maybe it was Mr. Jones, about where the bridge was located. So, Dustin, if you could go back to maybe the first, yeah, that one will work. So right now, you can see the canopy over Revere on the west side of the road is basically directly west from the entrance to the west building. We moved the bridge down a little bit, and that was at the request of Revere as well. They didn't want it right out, that footprint of the bridge and the stairs further north. That would be basically right in front of their building. They didn't want to block that. And secondly, once we do move that down and we do have direct access into the building, at least the majority of the people who use this, which would be physicians going back and forth, would have that direct access instead of having to go down to the west lobby on the first floor and then access from there, if that makes sense. So really just wanted to entertain any other questions that you may have. Yeah.
This goes perhaps beyond the scope, but I assume the hospital security apparatus is going to take care of locking and the security of this component.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
that would be my concern with it.
Yeah, and that's why the 9 to 5 hours we're deciding upon. So after 9 p.m., there's very few entrances that are open in the hospital, and that's due to events that we've had in the past. Visitors, guests, anyone who comes at that time needs to check in at the desk just so we know who's coming in and who's going out. We will have the security cameras going 24/7. But yes, our security will do the lockdowns and open up every day at 9 and 5.
Thank you.
Ms. Winded?
Just south of the Revere Health, used to be, I don't know if it still is, but that building used to be kind of a Ronald McDonald House of sorts. I don't.
It's a guest house, the Intermountain Guest House.
Yes.
Yeah.
Will the parents or families that stay there, will they have some sort of pass that they'll be able to access that walkway at all hours, or after 9 p.m. will they just have to cross the street on foot?
Well, so if we have family members staying at that location, their family member in the hospital will be in the new Peterson Tower, which is south of there. So to be honest, the quickest way for them to get to their family member would still be going down to 940 and crossing there and going into the hospital that way. And so we actually discussed that and considered it. There's always complications when you're issuing access pass to family members, but because it's probably the easier path of travel going down to 940 anyway, that's what we had decided upon.
Mr. Smith?
I'm just curious, this is going to be an access badge access, or is it just going to be unlocked, open during the hours?
Yeah, so between 5 a.m. and 9 p.m., this will just be open. The stairwell, the elevator will be open. The only difference is that after 9 p.m. on the west side of the road, both those will be closed off, so no one can access it from that side. And then the doorway, which leads out to the sidewalk on the east side, will be locked at that point as well.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll turn this over to any neighborhood chairs that would like to speak to this matter. And please state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Kirby. I'm the North Park Neighborhood Chair, the neighborhood where this bridge is in. Over the last several months, we've had multiple meetings where this has come up, and we discussed with residents, got their concerns. Originally, it wasn't going to be public access, but we're very grateful that the hospital changed their plan. If you do approve this, and residents were concerned about this not only for the bridge, but also for the precedents you're setting with granting the ability to encroach in the setback, and then, of course, over the right-of-way, which is UDOT's. We wanted to make sure that you, if you're going to approve this today, that you approve it on the condition that there's a public easement granted, so that 9 to 5 doesn't, in a month from now, when they decide, you know what, we don't really want to do that anymore, they go ahead and make it access badge only. Josh said that would be okay. So that's something I think that the hospital is willing to do, but I would make that a condition of approval today. Now, there is another option to wait on this, and the only reason I'd say is because, Deborah, I think you brought up very rightly that this is a lot of expense for a bridge when you could have a hog crossing. And if politely, if I can, it wasn't something that the hospital looked into. This was something that we brought up with them, and the response was from Josh that that this was kind of already rolling, and they don't want to now stop and not do the bridge and take a look at something else. So they're already headed down this road. The only reason, other than a bridge, access at grade crossing would be good to at least explore with UDOT, because they are open to the idea. We're actually discussing with them right now for the expansion that they're doing on 500 West. We're talking with them about a hot crossing at Third North, because right now there's only a light at 5th, and then there's a light at Center or at 2nd. So there's a big gap between where there isn't any crossings. So we're talking with them about a hot crossing, and their response has been, that's not our preference, but if the city wants it, if the residents want it, then we're willing to talk about it. So all I would say is they're actually not building this pedestrian bridge until 2019. The reason they want to do it now, as Josh explained, was that they currently have an architect that they've hired on staff that's on retainer for this year, and that's going to end. So if we wait and they don't do the final design, well, maybe they have to pay them a little bit more to design this next year. I think it's worth the ability to just explore the idea of an at-grade crossing, that maybe we wait. But if you decide not to wait, I'd say the neighborhood is good with conditionally approving this with a public right-of-way easement on the bridge, so that public access is maintained. Not only is that important here, but it's important for a commission maybe a few years down the road when somebody else asks them to put a private bridge over public property, that they see that there wasn't a precedent for doing that without public access, an easement. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this item? If not, I'll turn it back over to the commissioners for discussion.
I've worked with UDOT before on state highways, and I know that sometimes they don't like at-grade crosswalks because they've proven to be less safe in a lot of locations, because pedestrians become less aware when they feel like they own that space on the street. So I know that's one reason why they're leery of doing at-grade crosswalks on state highways.
Mr. Smith?
My only question is, are people going to take the time to go down to this, go up the stairs, go across, come down, and move up again and go in, where they can just sprint across the street and play Frogger a little bit? I think a lot of us might tend to do that, honestly. So I don't know if there's any studies where these things are proven to work or be effective, but I wonder if we might just see the same kind of attempted crossings, regardless of the thing being there. My other comment is on the public easement is, there's nothing there now. There are crossings north and south of this. I'm not sure why we need to make it the conditional on public easement or access, other than, any more than what's already been spoken of by the applicant of this being open to the public between the hours of 5 and 9, so.
Ms. Wendon?
I've seen the hawk lights work well there by Provo High, and the new one that they've put in on 300 South and 200 East. And I don't think that they see quite the traffic that it would here. And obviously, I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't know, about the backlog of traffic. But Bill, can we impose that sort of condition that public or that private property have to maintain public access, public easement?
Well, I'd like to hear the applicant's reaction to that request. The neighbor chair has said that he's open-minded to that. I'd like to hear the applicant respond.
Can I add while you're up to respond to both Chairman Jensen's question about the at-grade crossing and then the suggestion from the neighborhood chair.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more history on that and why you didn't consider pursuing an at-grade crossing. And I was taken by surprise, I guess, a little bit when the chair suggested that you hadn't really explored that path at all, and you're already too far down the path of the bridge, and that seems that was a little bit alarming to me.
Okay, yeah, no, happy to. So I can't speak for what was discussed and considered when this first came to inception because I was not part of that planning. I can loop back around with Kevin Brooks, the administrator, and others in the hospital to get a better idea for what was considered and what discussions did take place at that time. I can say that for the time being, and Kirby and I just spoke about this earlier this week, maybe it was last week, the preference of the hospital is to have the bridge, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is that the main purpose of this is for safety. And I understand that hot crosses have been proven effective in some locations. I find it difficult to argue that a raised bridge would be less safe than something that is on the surface. I think for the physicians who use this bridge, something that's raised would obviously be safer than something that's on the ground, regardless of what lights or notifications you put up for vehicles to stop, in addition to the amount of traffic that's coming down this road. Secondly, it was an access thing. Obviously, we want to keep this available to the public. I think that's a good service to allow people to cross somewhere between 940 and Bulldog. For the physicians, it's the convenience of being able to enter straight into the hospital. And on the second floor of the west building and moving into the new Peterson Tower, it's what we call the interventional platform. It's all the operating rooms, endoscopy suites, cath lab, EP lab, and so forth. And the majority of the physicians who come across are actually entering into that space, sometimes needing to get there quickly. And so to provide them direct access into that second floor was valuable to us as well.
Okay, and I preempted a question. I'm sorry, Bill, that you had wanted to address.
Yes, so then your position or opinion about having a public access easement on the bridge?
Yeah, so we haven't talked about that. I haven't spoken about that with our administrative team. I can loop back around and do that and then get with Dustin on it. I think they would be open to it. We haven't had the discussions. Kirby and I spoke about that just last week, and I haven't had time to bring that up with our leadership yet. But we can definitely have those discussions and loop back around.
If the Planning Commission is inclined to have that as a condition, then I would suggest go ahead and stating that as a condition. If the hospital comes back with the idea that that's not acceptable to them, then we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission and they can talk to you again about it at that time.
Yeah, I would just add that in my experience, actually working on medical facility buildings, physicians often want a separate, segregated, private entrance into the facility so that they don't encounter patients and the general public because of the nature of the work they do. So it's hard to say whether your administrators would go along with that being public access, free public access during those hours.
So you're talking during business hours?
Yes.
So that's been confirmed. We've had many discussions with Rahrah on the west side of the road, and they're completely supportive of the plans as they are now. Again, what I was reiterating was the convenience of having them enter straight onto the second floor and go into the interventional platform. And again, the safety. It's the physicians mainly who will be using this, and given the frequency at which they cross that street, that would be my concern of a surface crossing as well, is how often that would take place and the traffic backing up on State Street.
Any other questions for the applicant? No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, commissioners, I'll look for further discussion or a motion.
Just a question, maybe for Mr. Wright. How long does a hawk signal hold back traffic?
I don't.
Cross traffic that has to cross the street, vehicular, I mean. So how long does it hold back for a pedestrian?
Yeah, they would probably do a study on that to determine, based on each road is going to have a different time needed to cross. So I'm sure it would be based upon the road, and there would be some study done when that's determined.
And just to clarify, a hawk signal, is that a pedestrian-activated signal?
Yeah, so on each side of the street, there'd be a button that a pedestrian would push, and it would then, at a point, trigger some lighting that would signal vehicular traffic to stop as they crossed, and then that would turn off after that period of time that was determined to be necessary for that street type. And then if I could make one more comment on conditions, just with the, you see here on this image, we're showing where the potential signage would be. I don't think I mentioned that that's just something that staff would like as a condition of approval, that we still see that signage, and then staff would be able to issue a staff approval on that.
And Mr. Day, would you like to speak a little bit about the pedestrian-activated signal?
Yes. So the amount of time that it stopped is the amount of time that the pedestrian would require to cross, plus clearance times. So it's 3.5 feet per second. And so say you're like 100 feet, you're 35 seconds of stopped time to get the average person across. Then you'd add like 2 seconds of all clear and 4 seconds of yellow time. So, you're probably around 45 seconds of delay there while someone's crossing. However, if something like that went in, it would probably be timed with the system. So probably the average user would see the crossing as a little bit inconvenient, because if they push the button, they'd have to wait for the progression of traffic when the in-phase time of the signal would turn it green anyway, or red, and then they would cross. That's similar to what you see on University Avenue or Second West. The buttons are actuated, but they do wait until the signal would have turned anyway, and it gives them the full clearance time at that point. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Mr. Jones.
As I see it, I would think that having the semaphore, the light, would delay the vehicular traffic twice as long as it would if there were no light, but just a simple crosswalk. Because as soon as the person crosses the midpoint, the traffic can move on. But the light would have to be red for the vehicular traffic for the amount of time it takes him to go from one curb to the other. Is that faulty reasoning, or is that correct?
That's correct. That's how it's designed.
So the light is not the cure-all.
No, and it would have to meet warrants. So in order for UDOT to put a pedestrian signal in there, they would have to go and count the number of pedestrians. I have no idea how many are there, so I don't know what to tell you, but it is a rather high number to warrant a signal for a pedestrian only. So it would be similar to what you would see at probably Center Street and University Avenue, the pedestrian traffic that goes back and forth in the downtown area.
Any other questions for Mr. Day? No? Thank you so much. Mr. Rowan.
I would just say that it seems to me that there's maybe two different ways to think about the proposal. If you think about it primarily as a way for private employees and those who use that, the hospital to get back and forth, that's one way to think about it. If you think about it in terms of the public, then you think in very different terms. And I'm not I'm not sure what is the best way to think about it, but it seems to me that what we're being asked to do is think about it primarily as a private crosswalk that happens to be accessible to the public during a certain period of time. I don't have a problem with this bridge violating the setback. It's on a busy street. I like things closer to the street and sidewalk anyways. So that line of thinking isn't as persuasive to me that well, since it's violating the setback, we need to think about it primarily in public terms. And so I'm inclined to pass or to approve the project. I mean, I think if we think about it just in private terms, then it makes sense if it's serving a very specific population and the private entity, the hospital is building it, maintaining it, all that stuff. I don't see an issue here. I would love to see a crosswalk. I mean, that's not to say I wouldn't love to see a crosswalk, but I don't know that it's their obligation to build us a crosswalk as a public.
I concur. I'm ready to make a motion.
Please.
Madam Chairman, I move that we approve item number 1 as presented. Does it have to go to the commission?
There were some conditions.
With the conditions as set forth by the staff. I move that we approve the Utah Valley Hospital minor project plan for a pedestrian bridge over 500 West at approximately 1100 North in the healthcare facility zone, subject to, what are those conditions? Staff approval of signage informing pedestrians where access points are and access and hours of operation.
I think we have to recommend approval to the city council.
It's a recommendation. I didn't see a star on it.
No,
Thank
it's not a recommendation. It's a
It's approval. There's no star.
We have the authority to approve or disapprove. Yes.
And
I'm glad. Thank you.
Do we have a second?
could I make a clarification? Did you also want the second condition that was discussed about the access, public access easement from
Public access.
Public access, yes.
during those
as
hours
presented.
of operation? Okay.
Okay. And do we have a second? Second. Mr. Jones, a second. All those in favor of approval of item 1?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay. So it passes with majority approval. Item 1 approved. Okay, item 2 is the Provo City Community Development Department requests ordinance amendments to sections 14.34.285 and 14.34.287, which are residential design standards, and these have citywide impact. And Mr. Ardmore will present this item.
Thank you. So you saw this last month. We were here to present it to you. At the time, we recommended continuance to give you a little bit of time to review the actual changes and to get some better informed decisions on that. So just for a quick review, the first few amendments are just to fix mistakes that were put into the code, referencing the wrong section. Then in 1434.285, other than changing the title, we're just clarifying what primary is defined as in those areas of the city, and just removing that subsection 1 because it just doesn't make sense, to be honest. And then the bulk of the proposal is in 287, and those are residential design standards primarily for your higher density products in the LDR zone, MDR zone, HDR, campus mixed use. There's a few other zones that reference it as well. But what staff is trying to do here is to make the code a lot less ambiguous, to provide durable, aesthetically pleasing buildings in these zones. And we propose to do that with this ordinance amendment. So you've had time to review it. I guess I'll just answer any questions if you have them. Staff's in support of these, obviously. We hope that this will improve the apartment and townhome products that we're getting in the city.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ardmore from the commissioners? If not, I'll invite any neighborhood chairs present if they would like to speak to this item. Any members of the public who would like to speak to this item? Okay. I'll turn it back over to the commissioners then for a discussion and/or a motion, and this will be for a recommendation for approval or disapproval to municipal council. Ms. Ellsworth.
Aaron, does it matter that it says as primary 51% building materials? Does it need to say 51% or more? That's a good question. I'm sure Brian Jones will catch that once it gets to him if he has an issue. He did review this before this meeting, but he'll have another look at that. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Rowan.
I'd like to make a motion. I move that we forward a positive recommendation on item 2, Provo City Community Development Department's request for an ordinance amendment to section 14.34.285 and 14.34.287, which are residential design standards.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Smith. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will unanimously forward a positive recommendation for municipal council to approve item 2. And our last item this evening, item 3. Celeste Cunard, Acting Joaquin Neighborhood Chair, requests an amendment to Section 14.34.290 of the Provo City Code to add East Center Street as a design corridor. This affects the Joaquin, Mazer, Foothills, and Provost neighborhoods. And Josh Yost will present this item.
Thank you. You first saw this item last month, and since then we have made a number of revisions to the draft that you reviewed, both to reflect comments made in that meeting and to reflect additional consideration, revisions, desire for clarification, basically internal work that we did throughout that period. I have provided you in your staff report. On the front of your staff report is essentially a list of the specific revisions that were made up to the end of last week when the staff report was issued. We had some further discussion on one specific element of this in our staff meeting on Monday, which prompted a few additional changes. Those are reflected in my slideshow that I have for you here, and then I also have a marked up copy here that is essentially the same as what is behind your cover sheet, but including the few additional changes we made since our staff meeting. I can run you down the changes we've made that are on that sheet, and then the ones that are subsequent to that, if you would like, or if you have any other large questions you'd ask me before I do that, or if you're comfortable moving forward without a detailed review. Does anyone have a preference on how you'd like me to proceed?
Madam Chairman, can you give us just a little synopsis of the highlights of what's going on?
So there's a number of cleanups on this cover sheet. The first one, we removed an item that was duplicative and created some full sections out of what were previously subsections. At subsection 5D8.3 at lines 86 and 87 in this copy, and then this was subsequently amended, but essentially what we did is we created a regulation providing for the maximum width of the rear section of a courtyard building. So if I come over in my draft, you can, previously we hadn't defined a maximum width of this section. If these are this is the street, and these are your wings on this. We only had a minimum here, and standing in the shower one morning, it became increasingly uncomfortable with not having a maximum there. So we've created a maximum of that, which is, as it is now constituted, twice the width of these front sections, with a minimum depth of 40 feet. As we measured out what was on the street and observed what courtyards seem to host activity and which don't, it seems like two of the courtyards that are shallower that exist don't see much activity or use, probably because they don't provide much of a sense of enclosure adjacent to the street. And so the ones that were at least 40 feet, we try to avoid some mathematical terms that we kind of came up with and just decided that 40 feet based on what was on the street was appropriate. And with a minimum internal distance of 20 feet and a maximum of double this front width. We broke the two subsections of building materials to provide a section regarding fence materials, as was discussed in the Planning Commission, and then a subsequent discussion with the neighborhood representative. They felt that that was appropriate. So we essentially added that final subsection that prohibits chain link and other wire mesh products and vinyl as fencing materials in the corridor. So those are the general changes that we've made. And we have the physical copy that you've received reflects that final result of all of that. And a number of these yellow highlights on this and the one I just handed out are references pointing to this diagram we included to make the references more clear.
Any questions for staff?
I think we discussed, you kind of gave us an outline last meeting or something on this, as I recall. Isn't that right? And there's nothing pending going to be impacted right now about this, so this seems like a cogent thing to do.
Right. There's one project that has been applied for and was denied, and we anticipate we'll be returning with an application sometime in the near term. But right now there are no pending applications that would be directly affected by this ordinance amendment.
Ms. Winded?
Any properties along Center Street that falls within this area, if they want to replace something, say like fencing, they'll have to adhere to this if it passes.
Correct.
They can't replace it with the same, if they had chain link, they can't replace it with their fencing with chain link.
If there was an existing material, we would allow the replacement in kind of an existing structure, an existing fence or site feature like that.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Rowan?
I just had some question about the correspondence between the previous item that we heard and this. And I know that they're slightly different. This is exclusive. The third item that we're talking about now is exclusively for the Center Street corridor, whereas the previous item was for the Joaquin neighborhood more broadly and RC zone. Is that the right way to have interpreted that?
So the previous item actually affects, the RC and the Joaquin design area,
right,
and then all of the LDR, MDR, HDR, campus mixed use areas.
So
they do actually overlap
right,
in geographic area, but the design corridor would take precedent over the design guidelines in the base zone.
Okay. So I guess my question is, to what degree the building material list, it doesn't contradict, it just doesn't include or enumerate the same kinds of materials, to what degree that was intentional versus just kind of unintentional. So in the building materials in the Center Street design corridor, it's only brick and wood or composite siding, whereas in the previous item, the Joaquin and RC zones, you have, in addition to brick, you have stone and architectural metal panel system. Is there a clear reason that stone, for example, is left off the list in the Center Street corridor as a possible material? Is it just because that's not currently there, or?
The materials were specifically determined by the neighborhood as reflecting the current character of the corridor. In my interaction with the neighborhood representatives, there wasn't any specific discussion as to why stone was omitted. The elements, the materials that were included were because of their specific considerations.
Yeah.
So that's why it is more limited, especially not including that architectural metal paneling as a primary building material.
Yeah.
There's very few materials, as you look, that are actually specifically forbidden at all, but all of those secondary materials are limited to no more than 20% of the building, excluding the roof.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar enough with Center Street in just my mind's eye to remember to what degree there's stone on the facing the street.
There are a number of homes with stone foundations or water tables, and
Stone fences or walls. I feel like I remember, or being part of.
There,
but I can't.
There are some brick masonry walls that may include some stone accents. And again, you're allowed to use basically any other material up to 20%.
Right.
So that would include the houses that have stone window surrounds, stone door surrounds, lintels and sills, those type of decorative elements.
Right. And then the same question about the shortness of the list on the prohibited materials. So you have, for example, in this one, stucco is prohibited. In the Center Street, stucco is not listed as a prohibited material. Unfinished wood is prohibited in the item number 2, but not in the Center Street.
Right.
Again, I didn't know to what degree that was.
There was
intentional or
no
just kind of
coordination
accidental.
between those two lists.
And so maybe it's worth having a conversation about to what degree we might want to consider that at maybe beefing up that list in the Center Street.
So in item 2, that stucco is actually permitted as a secondary material.
Yes. So we have prohibited major materials, EFS, synthetic stucco, unfinished or untreated wood, glass block, vinyl aluminum siding, plastic, fiberglass, acrylic panels.
Right. So instead of doing a exclusion list, we just enumerated those that are allowed and only those that are allowed as primary materials.
Yeah.
So
again,
yeah.
And maybe it's up to the neighbor, Celeste and others working on this to determine how specific they want to get there. But it did seem inconsistencies I just observed were interesting and worth talking about.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Smith?
I was just going to say that this is a design corridor, so things can be very different from one section to even just a closely neighboring section. So, I mean, it really is up to these things are really up to the neighbors. And I would hope that they would have kind of reviewed all the options they have and chosen the things that would make things feel most the way things feel now. And I don't know that they would have,
Any other questions for staff this time?
I have a question. It looks like there's 2 parcels that are not affected.
Any holes in this just result from the fact that in the GIS data there are not common area parcels for condo projects, so they weren't able to be highlighted in the mapping program. So this parcel is included, this parcel is included, this parcel is included, this parcel. Basically, anything, it's defined as all lots with frontage on East Center Street and abutting lots under the same ownership are subject to this.
Okay, thanks.
So to prevent somebody from creating a minimum lot along the frontage is essentially a protection strip from the design corridor. We included those adjacent lots under common ownership.
Awesome.
Any other questions for staff? If not, I'd like to invite the neighborhood chair to speak to this matter. And please state your name for the record.
I'm Celeste Cunard, the acting walking neighborhood chair. I live at 160 North, 400 East. So as far as the materials on the Center Street corridor, I think originally it had rock on the foundation. What we were worried about is that like really fake looking kind of big river rock stuff that we were trying to keep out of there. So if that helps. Let's see, and then the other, is there anything else on that section? Yeah, because there's two other things. One other thing that I noticed is just looks different than what I thought the height in the height section. It says 35, and I thought we said 25.
I don't know if it's okay with the chair if we're both up here.
Yes, please.
Yes, please state your name for the record,
So
Beth.
I'm Norm Thurston from Foothills Neighborhood. I'm not the chair, but I was the designee to work on this project for Foothills Neighborhood.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on lines 47 through 50, this gets a little complicated, and I think we've got a way of making it simpler. So sometimes you have lots where it makes sense for the buildings that are farther back to be taller than the buildings that are closer. We had a global maximum of 35, and then the buildings that are close to the street, we wanted them to fit in with the ones that are there. And so we have this language of not exceed the average front facade height of existing single-family dwellings on the same block. I went out and did a kind of a survey as best I could tell what that would look like in practice. And the reality is there's not that very much variation from block to block. And when there is, it's kind of crazy. Like we have one block where the maximum height is, I think, 12 feet. And so it just doesn't make sense. It would make more sense and be easier for staff to consistently implement if we set a maximum height of 30 feet, except that any street-facing facade within 50 feet of the right-of-way shall not exceed 25 feet. And then we don't have to have somebody fighting you about, well, what does average mean? And what does the block mean? And what does existing mean? And there's just numbers there. And so that was a suggestion that we had discussed at one point, is 35 is a global maximum, and then 25 for the part that's close to the street. And that 25, I don't know if you're familiar with Center Street, but there's the Hadley's home is kind of the one that kind of most of us feels like it's the tallest one that you'd want. It's kind of a flat facade. It's a
545.
Give a pointer on.
Oh,
There's a pointer? Okay. Right?
that's right.
There.
This one, I believe.
Yeah.
Wait, is that right? No, it's the
Fourth
third
east,
one.
it's
This one.
that one right there. Yeah, it's a gray
It's a
Georgian, ish, Georgian-ish home. It's really pretty. But it's
very square.
it's a very square flat facade. So it's the biggest looking thing
like
that
very the I like the accessorizing on the,
yeah.
I can't think of the words.
So, and when we went and met, we asked them, to look at their plans, and they went and looked, and they said that their facade is about 25 feet. And so we said, okay, that makes sense for the whole corridor. We wouldn't want anything close to the street that's taller than that home. But if there's something farther back, it's on a secondary lot, 35 feet makes more sense. I don't know, do you guys have a street view? Yeah, because I think it really does help to see that one. But and then while they're looking for that, just address the issue of stucco. Yes, we don't want stucco. And I think the way that this was written was to accomplish that by not saying what we don't want, it's just what we do want. We want brick or, I'm at a loss for these technical terms, but
So
lap board siding? Is that the correct term?
There's stucco today?
No, that
There-
side of the
there
street,
is.
but just go a block.
In fact, you're going to look at one here in just a second.
The stucco is so different now compared to then too. Like the stucco in our neighborhood, I mean, it just lasts for such a long time. It's such a thicker, more substantial product.
And we had talked about that. So the problem is that stucco is a broad range of materials, and these days when someone says they're going to build a housing project and it's going to be all stucco, everyone just kind of chokes and says, because it's not the quality stucco that they would have put on in 1940. It's the quick and quick and easy, and I can paint it fast stucco that's going to crack in a few years. So we just kind of said, like, as a neighborhood, no new stucco buildings. The ones that are there are fine. We have no problem with the ones that are there, and if they want to remodel them and keep them stucco, that's fine. But we don't need any new stucco buildings with new material stucco. So that's about the tallest home, single-family home that there is on the street in terms of both appearance, and I think by measurement it's got to be close. And so that one is 25 feet of actual facade. So that's just a suggestion that we have. It would make it easier for staff to implement, and it would be more readable to a person who's reading this, trying to figure out what it means.
That's a good addition, good correction.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Other than that, I mean, just a quick comment as to why this was important to us and how much work this. So this involved all 4 neighborhoods: Mazer, Foothills, Joaquin, and Provost. Representatives from each of the neighborhood. We had several meetings, and then we took it back out to all the neighborhood meetings, and had a lot of feedback and comment. This is very different than when we started. And the idea that everybody kind of came to the conclusion is that we don't want somebody to bring in some new project that diminishes or competes with or overshadows the historic homes that are there. We want them to be, they can be fancy, they can be nice, they can be big, but they have to be compatible with their neighbors so that everything that's there kind of maintains that consistent rhythm, flow, design, all of these architectural terms that we've had to learn that we didn't know. So, and here we are with something that we think, I don't know, I don't see anybody here in opposition. And that's probably because everybody that made a comment in any of our neighborhood meetings, we've addressed them to their satisfaction, as far as we know.
And also, 6 years ago when we were doing the Joaquin neighborhood plan, we had covered a lot of this ground already. So,
That doesn't mean they've been in our process for 6 years.
See that? Yeah.
So.
No, our process took us just about a year. But their process was much faster than that. A matter of weeks to get response back when we brought them a proposal. It's just a matter of days or weeks to get an answer back from them.
Right, yeah.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of questions for you, Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm looking at line 36. It says skylights, solar panels, and other rooftop devices shall be minimized and located on non-street facing roof planes. Would that effectively eliminate solar panels for anyone on the north side of Center Street? Because they wouldn't really get sun on the north side of their house?
It all depends on their solar exposure with vegetation, because many homes oriented north and south have west-facing solar panels.
And that's actually where Provo needs more panels right now, is west. I mean, just because of the supply of electricity coming from solar panels is really high when the southern is, but not so much on the west. When it's really hot and you want to run your air conditioner.
The other thing that you can do is our house, for example, when we bought it, had the old style solar heating system from the 70s. And so our house has a front-facing roof, which is pitched, and then there's a space behind it, and then the solar panels were hidden behind the roof. So they're actually on the back side of the house, but still faced south.
Oh.
And it's still, so you couldn't see them from the street, but because they were hidden by the front of the house. So it can be done. Just depends on the architecture of the home, which way the roofs face and all that stuff. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicants? If not, thank you. Good job.
Yeah.
Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this item? If not, I will turn it back over to the planning commissioners for a discussion and/or a motion.
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of item 3. I didn't hear a lot of discussion to the planning commission or to the city council.
Would you like to include including the proposed amendment to the building height section?
Absolutely, including the correction and amendment to the building height to be 25 feet.
I'll second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will forward a positive recommendation to municipal council to approve item 3. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Just a minute, who seconded that? Andrew seconded? Yes.
Andrew, sorry.
I move, I'll second.
So moved. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
No, I think it's.